Zor Undala had seen his fair share of broken things. Ships torn apart by raiders, satellites drifting aimlessly, gutted for scrap, space stations abandoned, left to rot in the void. He had spent most of his life picking through wreckage, salvaging what could still be used, fixing what was left behind. But this was different. The jungle of AN-4 was a graveyard of green, thick vines twisting around the remains of the downed alien vessel. The wreck had torn through the canopy, leaving a jagged scar of crushed foliage and splintered trees in its wake. Smoke still curled from broken engines, flickering embers of a ship that had tried and failed to make it out alive. Soren adjusted the strap of his toolkit over his shoulder, stepping carefully over twisted metal and cracked plating. The Tio ship had been large, a long-haul freighter by the looks of it, but something about it was wrong. The damage wasn't from impact alone. There were blaster burns across the hull, scorch marks that told a different story. Someone had shot it down. That was a bad sign. Zor exhaled, running a gloved hand through his sweat-damp hair. He had been looking for salvage, maybe a working reactor core or some navigation components. Instead, he had found something hunted, and he wasn't alone. A sound reached him, faint, almost lost in the jungle's steady hum of alien life. A deep rhythmic breath, strained and ragged. Not a machine, not wreckage, something alive. He turned a corner past the collapsed cargo hold, and that's when he saw them. Chained to the crumpled remains of the hull, a dragon lay broken against the metal. Soren froze. It was massive. Its body, curled protectively around itself, scales shimmering in the dying light of the wreckage, shifting between deep blues and radiant gold. Chains wrapped around its legs and wings, thick reinforced alloy shackles, the kind used to restrain something dangerous. But it wasn't alone. 3 small figures huddled beneath its massive wing. Hatchlings. Their tiny bodies trembled, their wings folded tightly against them. Soren's chest tightened. They had been left here. Whoever had chained them had never intended to come back. The mother dragon lifted her head slightly at his presence, her golden eyes locking onto him. There was no mistaking the fire still left in them, the sharp intelligence that pulsed behind the pain. She let out a low growl, weak, but still filled with warning. She didn't trust him. He didn't blame her. Soren exhaled, lifting both hands, slowly showing he wasn't a threat. "Easy, girl," he murmured. "I'm not here to hurt you." She bared her teeth in response, a flicker of defiance even as the chains kept her grounded. Soren clenched his jaw. This wasn't just a wreck, it was a prison. And the only question left was whether he was going to walk away, or do something insane. The hatchlings were barely breathing. Soren crouched slowly, every move deliberate, keeping his eyes on the mother dragon as he pulled a small scanner from his toolkit. It let out a quiet hum as it swept over them, the display lighting up with readings: dehydration, malnourishment, minor injuries. But the chains were the real danger. The metal was high grade, built to hold something incredibly strong. And it was pressing too tightly against her limbs. Left unchecked, it would kill her. And the hatchlings, they wouldn't survive without her. Soren let out a slow breath. He had 2 options. Walk away. Pretend he hadn't seen this. Pretend it wasn't his problem. Or cut her loose. And deal with the consequences. The mother dragon watched him, her nostrils flaring. She already knew his decision. Soren rolled his shoulders. "All right," he muttered. "Let's get you out of here." She rumbled softly as if unconvinced. Yeah, Soren sighed. "You don't trust me yet. That's fair." He reached into his pack, pulling out a plasma cutter. The device whined softly as it powered up, a thin blade of superheated energy igniting at the tip. The moment the glow flared to life, the mother dragon tensed. Her tail twitched, wings straining against the chains. Her instincts screamed at her that this was another weapon. Another threat. Soren didn't flinch. He kept his movement slow, steady, lowering the cutter toward the first shackle. The heat barely kissed the metal before she snarled, muscles tensing like she was ready to fight through the pain. "Hey," Soren murmured. She froze, nostrils flaring. "I know it hurts," he said, his voice calm, steady. "But if I don't do this, you'll never get back up." She stared at him, golden eyes burning, searching for something in his expression. He let her see it. Not pity, not fear, just a promise. Her growl faded slightly, her muscles still trembling, but she didn't move away. Soren let out a slow breath, then pressed the cutter to the shackle. The metal hissed, glowing white-hot, sparks raining down as the first link snapped. The dragon flinched. The hatchlings whimpered. Soren ignored the sweat dripping down his back, the tight coil of tension that refused to leave his gut. One by one, he cut the restraints, the scent of burning alloy thick in the air. With each fallen chain, the mother, dragon's breathing grew steadier. By the time the last shackle snapped free, she let out a long, shuddering exhale. The jungle went silent. Soren powered down the cutter, stepping back, and then she moved. Her massive frame shifted, muscles flexing. For the first time in what must have been weeks, the hatchlings pressed close to her side as she stretched one wing, then the other, testing her strength. She turned to Soren for the first time since he had arrived. There was no fear in her gaze, no hostility, just something else. Something older, something thankful. Soren exhaled. "Well," he muttered, "guess I really did it this time." The mother dragon tilted her head. Then, without warning, she nudged him gently, her snout pressing against his shoulder. Soren stilled. A test. An acknowledgement. A moment of understanding. Soren let out a slow, shaky laugh. "Yeah," he murmured. "You're welcome." The hatchlings chirped softly. The mother dragon lifted her head, glancing toward the wreckage, then to the sky. She wasn't running. She was waiting for him. Soren swallowed. The real question wasn't whether he was going to save her anymore. It was what came next. The mother dragon shifted her weight, her powerful legs trembling as they adjusted to the unfamiliar freedom. Every step she took was slow, deliberate, as if she had forgotten what it felt like to move without the weight of those chains. Her wings, vast and brilliant even in the dim jungle light, flexed experimentally. Soren could see the strain in her muscles, the way exhaustion still clung to her, but she wasn't giving up. Her hatchlings clung close to her side, their small bodies quivering as they too tried to stand properly for the first time in days. They were weaker, their movements uncoordinated, but their instincts were strong. They wobbled but did not fall. Their bright, untested eyes glanced up at their mother for reassurance. Soren stayed back, watching the process unfold, knowing this moment wasn't his. It belonged to them. The mother dragon turned her head to him, her golden gaze searching, questioning. He knew what she was thinking. What now? Where do we go from here? And the truth was, he didn't know. Soren exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "One step at a time, lady," he murmured. "Let's figure out how to keep you on your feet first." She tilted her head slightly at his voice, then gave a huff, a noise not of frustration, but acknowledgement. Then, without hesitation, she began to move. Her wings dragged slightly as she walked, her body still betraying her exhaustion, but each step was stronger than the last. The hatchlings followed, chirping softly, their tiny claws scraping against the wreckage as they struggled to keep up. Soren moved to walk alongside them, keeping his pace slow. He had no doubt she could move faster if she wanted to, but she wasn't leaving him behind. That thought sat strangely in his chest. They reached the edge of the jungle clearing, where the wreckage met dense foliage. The ship had carved out a path during its descent, and beyond that, the untamed wild stretched into the unknown. The mother dragon lifted her head, nostrils flaring as she scented the air. Soren could see the tension in her shoulders, the hesitation. She wasn't just checking for danger. She was searching for something that wasn't there. Soren's jaw tightened. Whoever had chained her here hadn't just tried to kill her. They had taken her from somewhere. From something. She wasn't lost. She had been stolen. And now, for the first time, she was free. Soren sighed, adjusting the strap of his toolkit over his shoulder. "All right," he said, his voice lighter than he felt. "Now what?" The mother dragon turned her golden eyes to him, and for the first time she didn't look lost. She looked ready. The jungle was alive with movement, the thick canopy above rustling as unseen creatures moved between the branches. Strange, flickering lights pulsed in the distance. Bioluminescent plants reacting to the humidity, shifting from deep blues to eerie greens. The air was heavy, damp, carrying the scent of the storm that would no doubt roll in before nightfall. Soren had been on dozens of planets, but this one had a pulse. Something untamed and ancient, something that reminded him that he was not at the top of the food chain here. The mother dragon knew it too. She walked with purpose, her movements slow but deliberate, her hatchlings keeping close. Occasionally she would stop, nostrils flaring, listening. Soren had never seen a creature so alert, so aware. Even in her weakened state, she carried herself like a queen who had been momentarily dethroned, but was about to take back her kingdom. Soren, meanwhile, was focused on a more immediate problem. His ship was miles away and the sun was already dipping lower on the horizon. Getting the dragon and her hatchlings there in time was impossible. They needed shelter, and they needed it fast. He kept scanning the landscape for something. A cave, an overhang, even a thicket dense enough to provide cover. But the jungle was thick, suffocating, offering too many hiding places for things that might want to kill them. The mother dragon suddenly stopped. Soren halted too, hand instinctively reaching for the pulse pistol at his hip. She let out a low, guttural sound. Not quite a growl, but close. Soren followed her gaze. There was movement in the underbrush. For a heartbeat, all was silent. Then the thing lunged. Soren threw himself backward just as a massive insectoid predator burst from the foliage, its jagged mandibles snapping inches from his face. Its body was covered in black chitin, multiple limbs clawing at the ground as it scrambled toward them. Soren fired. The first shot hit its shoulder, sizzling against the carapace. The creature screeched, a piercing, grating sound that set his teeth on edge. Then the mother dragon moved. She didn't hesitate. She roared, a sound so loud, so filled with fury, that the trees themselves seemed to flinch. And then she tore into the beast. She was still weak, but she fought like something that had been waiting for this moment. The creature tried to claw at her, but she was faster, smarter. She dodged, struck, used her powerful tail to slam it against the trunk of a tree. Soren took the opportunity to fire again, this time right through its exposed underbelly. The thing screeched once more, then fell dead. Soren let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, lowering his gun. His pulse was still hammering. But the mother dragon, she wasn't even breathing hard. She turned to him, golden eyes sharp. It wasn't just survival, it was a statement. She wasn't chained anymore. Soren exhaled, shaking his head. Right. Reminder to never piss you off. The mother dragon huffed, then turned to her hatchlings. They had crouched low during the fight, their tiny wings pressed, flat against their backs, but they weren't afraid. They had seen what their mother was. Soren ran a hand through his hair, glancing at the fading light. We still need shelter. The dragon blinked. Then, as if she understood, she turned, sniffing the air, and then she started walking. Soren hesitated before following. He had been leading before, but now she was leading him. The jungle pressed in around them, the air thick, with moisture and the weight of the coming storm. Soren moved carefully, keeping pace with the mother dragon as she navigated through the dense undergrowth. Her hatchlings stayed close to her side, their small claws slipping on the damp terrain, but they did not fall behind. She had taken the lead. Her golden eyes scanned the landscape as if she had walked this world 1,000 times before. Soren wasn't about to question it. She knew what she was looking for. And after the fight with that insectoid predator, he wasn't about to assume the jungle wouldn't throw something worse at them. They needed to find a place to rest before nightfall. Thunder rumbled overhead, a deep rolling sound that sent vibrations through the earth beneath their feet. The mother dragon's bioluminescent scales flickered faintly in the dim light, reacting to the energy in the air. Soren caught himself staring, watching the way. The colors rippled along her body, like the auroras he had seen on ice-covered moons. Then, suddenly, she stopped. Soren nearly collided with her massive frame before catching himself. "What is it?" he muttered. The dragon lifted her head, nostrils flaring, ears twitching toward something unseen. Then, without a sound, she turned sharply and started toward the base of a rocky ridge, half hidden behind the dense foliage. Soren followed, pushing through the broad, waxy leaves. And then, he saw it. A cave. The entrance was wide but low, hidden beneath an overhanging rock face, jagged and weathered by time. It wasn't deep, but it would provide enough cover from the storm and whatever else lurked in the jungle. The mother dragon stepped inside first, lowering her massive body so her hatchlings could crawl in beside her. The smallest one, still struggling to keep up, let out a weak chirp. She turned, gently nudging it with her snout until it settled against her side. Soren exhaled. Well, I guess this is home for the night. He scanned the cave, making sure nothing was already living inside. The ground was dry. The air was cool. The scent of old stone lingered in the space. This would do. He set his pack down, rubbing his sore shoulders. The day had taken more out of him than he cared to admit. Every muscle in his body ached, but the adrenaline was still there. Still, keeping him sharp. He'd fought off scavengers before, had outflown guild enforcers, had survived bad crashes and worse deals. But this, being here with a dragon and her hatchlings, protecting something that had no reason to trust him, this was different. He crouched near the cave entrance, checking the charge on his pistol. The mother dragon watched him with those deep, knowing eyes. But she said nothing. Not that she could. Still, Soren felt like she understood. The storm broke overhead. Rain poured down in thick sheets, hammering the jungle outside, lightning flashing between the trees in quick, blinding bursts. The wind howled, carrying the distant calls of unseen creatures. Predators kept at bay by the storm's wrath. Inside the cave, it was silent, save for the steady breathing of the dragon and her young. Soren sat back against the wall of the cave, exhaustion creeping into his bones. Hell of a day, he muttered. The mother dragon blinked at him. Then, to his surprise, she let out a deep, rumbling exhale. Not a growl, not a threat, but something softer. It took him a moment to recognize it for what it was. Acknowledgement. For the first time since he found them, Soren realized. She wasn't just tolerating him anymore. She was accepting him. The fire crackled low, in the center of the cave, its small embers casting flickering shadows against the stone walls. Soren had managed to scavenge enough dry kindling from the wreckage earlier to start it, and though it wasn't much, it kept the chill at bay. The hatchlings had huddled closer to their mother, their tiny bodies rising and falling in rhythm, with her slow, steady breaths. Soren sat near the fire, rolling a ration bar between his fingers. He wasn't particularly hungry, but his body needed fuel. He took a slow bite, chewing absently as he watched the mother dragon. She wasn't asleep. She hadn't rested since they left the wreckage, and it was starting to show. Her body was still weak. Her movements, slower, more deliberate. The wounds, where the chains had cut into her scales, hadn't healed properly, and he doubted she had eaten anything substantial in days. "You need food," he muttered, mostly to himself. She flicked an ear at the sound of his voice, but didn't move. Soren sighed, rubbing his face. "I don't suppose you can eat ration bars, huh?" Silence. Didn't think so. The storm was still raging outside, but when Soren listened closely, he heard something else beneath the rain. A low, distant hum. His stomach dropped. Engines. Soren pushed himself up, moving quickly to the cave entrance, careful not to disturb the dragon or her hatchlings. He squinted through the downpour, searching the sky, and then he saw it. A ship. It wasn't large, but it was fast, skimming just above the treetops, searchlights cutting through the storm. Soren swore under his breath. They had come back. Whoever had left the dragon in chains wasn't finished with her yet. He turned back to the mother dragon. She was already watching him, sensing the shift in his posture, the sharpness in his movements. She knew. They had been found. Soren's pulse quickened. They had maybe minutes before that ship sent a team down. He had to think fast. He checked. His pistol. Half a charge left. Not enough. He looked at the hatchlings, still nestled against their mother, unaware of the danger bearing down on them. They weren't ready to run. Neither was she. Soren clenched his fists. There was only one option. He turned back to the entrance, jaw tight. "I'll handle this," he muttered. The mother dragon let out a low, dangerous growl, not at him. At them. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was ready to fight. Soren felt something cold settle in his gut. He didn't know if they could win, didn't know if this was the fight that would finally get him killed. But as he looked at her, at the raw fury burning behind those golden eyes, he knew one thing for certain. Whoever was coming for her had no idea what they were walking into. The sound of the ship grew louder, a deep, reverberating hum that pulsed through the jungle, rattling the leaves and sending small creatures darting into the undergrowth. The storm had masked its approach, but now the searchlights cut through the rain, bright beams piercing the dense canopy. Soren's grip on his pistol tightened as he positioned himself just inside the cave's entrance, half hidden behind the rocky overhang. The mother dragon stood at the back, her wings wrapped protectively around her hatchlings. Her golden eyes burned with something primal, not fear, fury. The ship hovered above the treetops, its sleek, predatory design confirming what Soren already suspected. This wasn't some random scavenger. This was a retrieval team, which meant they were coming in armed. A metallic voice crackled over an external comm system, distorted through layers of static. Target acquired. Heat signatures detected. Moving in for retrieval. Soren's stomach twisted. They hadn't expected resistance. They thought they were here to pick up cargo. They had no idea they were about to walk into a war zone. Through the downpour, Soren caught the glint of armor, the distinct shapes of figures descending from the ship on repulsor lifts. 3. Heavily armed. Their rifles, sleek, compact, built for containment, not combat. Containment. That meant they weren't here to kill the dragon. They were here to break her, again. Rage clawed at Soren's throat, but he forced himself to focus. He had one advantage: the storm. Visibility was low, and their sensors would be struggling against the electromagnetic interference. It wouldn't be enough to stop them, but it might be enough to slow them down. He exhaled, leveling his pistol. First shot had to count. The lead operative landed on the ground just outside the cave, scanning the area with a visor that flickered with digital readings. His boots crunched against the wet ground as he stepped forward. Weapon raised. Life signs confirmed. The voice from the ship announced, "Prepare for containment." Soren fired. The first shot hit clean, slamming into the lead operative's shoulder. The man barely had time to react before the blast knocked him backward, sending him skidding across the mud. The other two spun toward the cave, their visors flashing red as they switched to combat mode. Soren didn't wait. He fired again, forcing them to take cover behind the jagged rocks near the entrance. 1 against 3 wasn't good odds, but he wasn't alone. A deep, guttural snarl shook the air. Soren barely had time to move before the mother dragon launched forward. She didn't hesitate, didn't hold back. Her body, weakened, wounded, was still faster, stronger than any of them could have anticipated. She closed the distance in a heartbeat, claws slashing through the storm, her roar drowning out the rain. The second operative didn't even have time to scream before Her tail whipped across his body, sending him crashing into a tree. The third tried to raise his rifle, but she was already on him. Teeth sank into armor. A sickening crunch as metal bent beneath the force of her jaws. The man struggled, his weapon firing wildly into the air, but it was over. She threw him aside like scrap metal. The fourth operative hesitated. Big mistake. Soren shot him in the knee. The man collapsed, screaming as he clutched his leg. The mother dragon stepped forward, towering over him, her massive body silhouetted against the storm. He scrambled back, dropping his weapon. "Please," he gasped, holding up a shaking hand. Her lips curled, revealing rows of sharp, glistening teeth. Soren stepped beside her, his pistol still raised. She was waiting for his decision. Soren clenched his jaw. "Tell your people," he said coldly. "She doesn't belong to you anymore." The man nodded frantically, his breath ragged with terror. "Go." He didn't need to be told twice. He stumbled to his feet and ran. The moment he was gone, the mother dragon exhaled sharply, stepping back into the cave. Her fight was over, for now. Soren turned to her, breathing hard. "You good?" She blinked at him, nostrils flaring. Then, to his surprise, she nudged his shoulder with her snout. Not forceful, not demanding, just acknowledgement. Soren huffed out a weak laugh. Yeah, don't get all sentimental on me now." But she didn't move away, and neither did he. The ship was gone. The jungle was silent, for the first time in what felt like forever. They were alone. Soren sat at the cave entrance, his pistol resting beside him, watching the rain ease into a slow drizzle. His entire body ached, his muscles screaming from exhaustion, but his mind wouldn't stop. They had fought. They had won. But the guild would come back. They didn't take losses lightly. The mother dragon lay curled in the back of the cave. Her hatchlings tucked close against her side. The smallest one stirred, stretching out its tiny wings, letting out a soft chirp before nuzzling into her warmth. Soren ran a hand over his face. They needed a plan. They couldn't stay here. It was only a matter of time before the guild sent more, bigger ships, stronger operatives. He turned to the mother dragon. She was watching him again, her golden eyes unreadable, her breathing slow but steady. "You got a home out there?" he asked, quietly. "Somewhere safe?" She blinked once. Then slowly she shook her head. Soren's stomach sank. He had hoped maybe she had been taken from somewhere, from a place she could return to, that she had somewhere, just like him. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "All right then. We find one." The dragon lifted her head slightly. "You hear me?" He muttered. "I didn't cut you loose just so you could end up back in a cage. We're getting you out of here." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, she shifted forward, her snout pressing lightly against his forehead. Soren froze. Not a test, not hesitation, a decision, a bond. She trusted him, and he, for the first time in a long, long time, trusted someone too. He let out a slow breath, resting a hand against her massive, warm scales. "Guess that means we're in this together." The mother dragon let out a deep, rumbling hum, a sound that was not just agreement, it was something more, something permanent. Dawn came slowly, painting the jungle in hues of deep amber and pale gold. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, the remnants of last night's storm still clinging to the leaves. Soren sat at the mouth of the cave, staring at the distant sky, waiting. The guild would return. He knew it as surely as he knew how to fix a broken reactor. They had underestimated the mother dragon once. They wouldn't make the same mistake again. The dragon lay stretched out inside the cave, her hatchlings curled tightly against her. She had finally allowed herself to rest, her breathing slow and steady, but Soren could still see the tension in her frame. She was not at peace. She was waiting, just like he was. A distant hum broke the silence. Soren stiffened, turning his gaze skyward. The guild ship was coming back, but it wasn't alone. Through the thinning mist, he could make out 3 ships this time, their sleek forms cutting through the clouds, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. They weren't just bringing retrieval teams anymore. This was a kill squad. Soren's pulse pounded against his ribs. He turned to the dragon. "They're here." She didn't need to be told. Her golden eyes flicked open instantly, her nostrils flaring, muscles tensing as she pushed herself up onto her feet. The hatchlings stirred, sensing their mother's shift, in energy, chirping softly in fear. Soren grabbed his pack, slinging it over his shoulder as he checked his pistol. It was still low on charge, but it didn't matter. This wasn't going to be a fight of firepower. It was going to be a fight of survival. The first blast came from above, a fiery streak tearing through the treetops, igniting the jungle in a violent explosion. Soren flinched as the shockwave hit, sending leaves and debris,